Kakalosh Boker Tov, we're continuing on Daf Ayin Vav, which is 76 today. However, though, we're going to start just again on the Mishnah on the bottom of Ayin Hamud Bet, just that way to refresh our memories. We said that if the Basara Pesach, if the meat of the Korban Pesach touched the cheres of the tanur, the earthenware of the oven, the ovens were not made out of metal, the ovens were made out of earthenware. So Nagabe Cherso Shel Tanur Yiklof Mekomos. You have to do Kedek Klipa. Kedek Klipa means you peel like an onion peel. You peel off the meat on the first thin peeling, the first thin little tiny part of it. Okay, because that part was actually roasted because of the heat of the earthenware and not because of the fire. If right now you had that it actually dripped from the rotev on the cheres, on the earthenware, and then again it comes back to it, right? Which means that it touches again and it gets absorbed inside. You're going to have to do kedei netila. Netila is a little bit thicker than kedei klipa, because it has to be that it could stand on its own, which means that if you put it down, it's going to stand on its own. So they usually say it's around 2 centimeters. Nataf minotvo solit. If you have the rotev of the Korban Pesach that drips on top of fine flour that was inside of the tanur, okay? So you do kedei kemitza. Again, kedei kemitza, you go like this, and you pick up from the flour, and you take it out, okay? Sacho b'shemen shel truma. What happens right now, if we're talking about that you went and you anointed with the oil, okay, so you're coming and you're anointing with the oil of truma. So he says, if it's going to be chaburat kohanim, yochelu, eat it. Why? Because again, the chaburat kohanim, they're allowed to eat it. Im Yisrael, if they're going to be Jews, regular Jews, not kohanim. Im chayhu, if it's going to be raw meat, yidichenu, just rinse it off. In slihu, but if it was already going to be tzali, which means it's already going to be roasted, yiklof et hachitzon, so then they're going to peel it. Sacho b'shemen shel maaser sheni. If they went and they anointed it with oil of maaser sheni, so they're not allowed to come and they're not allowed to collect it from the people. You're not allowed to sell maaser sheni in Yerushalayim. Remember, maaser sheni is only going to be outside of Yerushalayim, not inside of Yerushalayim. Itmar, it was stated. Okay, so we're at the bottom of Ayin Hamud Bet, last line. Itmar, it was stated, the Gemara. Cham letoch cham. If you have hot in that fell inside of hot, so hot on hot. Ledivra akol, according to everybody, Ayin Vav Amud Aleph on the top, asur. According to everybody, it's going to be asur. Sonen letoch sonen. If it's going to be cold into cold, ledivra akol, according to everybody, mutar. It's going to be mutar. Cham letoch sonen. If it's going to be hot into cold, or sonen to cham, or cold into hot. Rav Amar, Rav says ila gavar, u'Shmuel Amar tata gavar. So Rav says the top is the one that overcomes, and Shmuel says the bottom is the one that overcomes. We know that we paskin the tata gavar, which means the bottom one overcomes, which means like this. If you take something hot and something cold, or cold and hot, which one overpowers which? Does the top one overpower the bottom one, or the bottom one overpowers the top one? Now, obviously, we're not talking about completely different quantities, because if you're going to take, 5 liters of one and 1 liter of the other, it doesn't matter which one's on top of what. I'm saying it's going to be such a, we're talking about more or less the same type of a concept. And what's going to happen is that what overcomes what. So for example, right, a lot of people, they don't realize this, right? But for example, let's say I'm going to take wine and grape juice and I'm going to mix it. So if I'm going to have, right, some people think that the top part overcomes. Why? Let's say I put the majority of wine and then I put a little bit of grape juice on the top. When you drink, people say, listen, it has a bit more of a taste of grape juice. But that's only because that's the first thing that came to your mouth. Really, behemet, the wine, because it's on the bottom, right, it overpowers that which is on the top. So that's what we actually say, even though by, obviously we're talking about when liquids come, they mix all together, right? But okay, but this is just the concept. So tonight we learned on a Mishnah. If you right now, if it dripped on top of the earthenware and then went and touched it again, so you do kedei netila. I would have thought to say becheres sonenet, we're talking about that it fell on top of a cheres, on top of earthenware, which was cold. So Bisham al Rav, it's good according to Rav, Damar ila gavar, that he says that it's the top one which is going to win. Mishum hachi yitol mekomo, but that's why we say yitol mekomo kedei netila. Te'azar rotev menatach lecheres, because the rotev is going to go and it's going to, right, heat up the cheres, the earthenware. Ve'hadar cheres menatach lerotev, and then it's going to come and it's going to be menatech the rotev. So now when the rotev goes back to the Korban Pesach, you're heating up the Korban Pesach you're roasting it with the heat of the earthenware, not with the heat of the fire. Remember, the Korban Pesach needs to be heated by the fire, not by anything else. Rachman Amar, so the Torah says, tzli esh velo tzli mechamat davar acher. It has to be tzli esh and not because of something else. It means it has to be roasted by the fire, not roasted by anything else. Ela li Shmuel, but according to Shmuel, that he says tata gavar, that the bottom one is what makes it more hot. Cheres, given since the bottom is cold, akura make a rotiv. It's just going to cool down the rotiv. So why do you have to come and do kedei netilah? At the end of the day, if the bottom is going to be cold, so the cooling is going to cool off everything else. So if it's going to cool it off, why do you have to do kedei netilah? Right? So answers the Gemara, just like Rabbi Shmuel says, we're talking about a hot, right, fine flour. That's what our Mishnah is talking about. And so too here, we're talking about a hot earthenware, which means that it's already hot. So since it's hot, it doesn't cool anything down, it just heats things up. Okay? Today we learned in the Mishnah, Nataf merotvo la solet, yikmotze mekomo. If right now it fell onto the fine flour, so what do? You have to do kmitza. You take off the kmitza, you take off the part of the flour. Kasa kadai, I would have thought to say that we're talking about solet sonenet, we're talking about cold flour. Bishma lerav, it's good according to Rav that he says ila gavar, that the top one overcomes the bottom one. Mishum hachi yikmotze mekomo. That's why you're going to do the kmitza. Timarta achla lesolet dahadar hudrane. Because then the rotev, which was heated up at the beginning, which heats up the solet, which is around it, that's the top one. The hadra solet, and then the solet is going to come. It's going to heat up the rotev. The kamat verotev mechamal chamitu the solet. So then the rotev, the liquid, is going to be heated up because of the flour. Rachman Amar in the Torah says, "Sli esh lo tzli mechamat v'acher." Ela li Shmuel, but according to Shmuel, that he says that the bottom one is the one that overcomes it. Solet, the fine flour, given the tzoneneti, since it's going to be tzonenet, akure kamekale, so then it's going to become cold. So lama li mekomo. Why do we have to do right? Shekmitza kedei mekomo. Okay. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Shmuel says Rabbi Yirmiyah in the name of Shmuel, besolet rotachat. We're talking about with fine flour which is already boiling hot. So since it's already boiling hot, that's why it's going to which means basically once we say that they're both hot, there's no such thing as the top one and the bottom one. They're both hot. So they both transfer. Okay? Yeah, so tonight we learned in the Mishnah. Sacho b'shemen shel truma. If right now you came and you put, remember that many times, even nowadays, for example, certain types of meats, right, ribs or things like that, if you want to make it very, very juicy, what do? You put on top of it like an oily, sometimes they make like a type of a, right, I'm not going to teach you cooking classes, maybe Baba Haki will do that, yeah, but, right, what do? You come and you put like a type of a saucing or dressing, right, on top of it. And this, wine and things like that on top. And then, but usually they make like a type of a dressing, and then they smear it on top of the ribs, and then they put the ribs in the oven. And when they put the ribs in the oven, the ribs they become very soft, because if not, what happens is they become very dry. It's not good. You're not going to eat dry ribs. You want to eat them when they're good. You understand? So what happens? So what happens is they would take the Korban Pesach and they would anoint it with oil. So here they wanted to anoint it with oil of truma. So if they're Kohanim, it's no problem. Kohanim, they're allowed to eat truma. What happens if it's Israelim? It's a problem, right? So it says here, if it's chavura kohanim yochelu, they're allowed to eat it. If it's chavurat of Israel, so if it's going to be raw, so then just come and just rinse it off. But if it's already going to be roasted, so then you have to do kedei klipa, which means that if this oil, what you anointed the Korban Pesach, and it's on the outside, and then you roast it, it gets absorbed. So you have to peel off the outer peel of the entire Korban Pesach, so you don't benefit from this truma, from this oil of truma.
How can the flour be hot?
Hot flour? You can't have hot flour. Yeah, you heat it up. Heat up flour. No, heat it up. You heat up flour. Yeah, you do without water. You heat it up. You could heat it up. Yeah.
What about to the meat when you do barbecue? Normally, the shochet puts take out all the blood of the meat, but
the liquid is okay that comes out.
Yeah. So, but sometimes you don't need to put the meat on salt if you're gonna use.
If you're gonna roast it, if you're gonna roast it on the fire. Exactly, on the fire.
If it's on fire.
100%. If you roast it on the fire.
If it's not on fire, you can. Yeah,
100%. You roast it directly on the fire.
And that's how you make a juicy meat.
Also. Yeah, also.
No salt.
Yeah, without salt, you do
only on fire. Is the only.
Yeah, it has to be under fire. Not on a regular barbecue, because if you do it on a regular barbecue, the blood could come in and make it a problem. So we're talking about open fire. So Bishlam al-Rav, it's good according to Rav that he says that the top one is going to overrule. That's why it's enough for the klipa. Why? Because the top, right, which is basically the shemen, the oil, is cold. But according to Shmuel, that he says that the bottom one is the one which is overcoming. So since the bottom one is hot, which is a meat, Kevin de Chamu, mivla bala. So it's going to absorb it completely. So why is enough for the klipa? The entire thing should become prohibited. Which means like this, sometimes you could come and you could say that something becomes prohibited. What becomes prohibited? The outside of it, because it's only the outer portion. So in such a case, I could understand. But if you're going to tell me that it gets completely absorbed, so the entire thing is prohibited. You understand? Sometimes you could have something that the entire thing gets absorbed inside of it, so then it's a big problem. But if you're going to tell me it's just the outer layer, so okay, so just cut out the outer layer. But sometimes it's the entire thing that gets absorbed. So not just an outer layer. Which one?
No way to extract whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, you would just have to cut it off. You would cut it off. So answers the Gemara, no. Here we're talking about sicha. What is sicha? Sicha is you're anointing it. So you just put a little layer on it. It's like, the egg that you put on top of the challah. You put tons of egg. You take one of those, how do you call them, the brushes, whatever it is, and you put the sesame seeds, and that's it. We're teaching classes of baking. Yeah, I'll charge you afterwards. Yeah? You're going to tell your wife, who taught you how to bake? Yeah? A baker's trip.
One of the most difficult things in the kitchen is to bake bread.
Yeah, 100%. Ask Baba Chaki. I'm going to give you a secret that I learned of being a mashkiach kashrut for many years. When you're baking bread, don't open up the oven. The more that you open up the oven, the more you destroy the bread. You have to leave the oven closed and you leave the bread inside. Yeah, until it's completely finished. If you want to turn on the light, you could see whatever, but don't. The more you open up the oven, the worse it is.
Yeah. You're good, Rabbi. Eh? You're good.
I'm good. You see?
Exactly.
I'm going to start charging for these.
Even croissant. If you open the oven, that's it. The croissant fell.
Yeah.
They go down.
You go down. Yeah, that's what it is. That's why, and all the baking things is very, very important. So that's why it's important to keep the light on, but not that. Very, very good. 1 second. We have a bright in accordance to the Shitav Shemuel that he says that the bottom one is overcomes. If it's going to be hot into hot, it's going to be asur. If it's going to be cold into hot, it's also going to be asur. Why? Because the bottom one overcomes the top one. But if it's going to be hot on top of cold or cold on top of cold, mediach, you just rinse it off and that's it. Says the Gemara, if it's hot into cold, you just rinse it out. Since the top one is hot, by the time it's going to cool it down, it's impossible. It's not going to cool anything. It's not going to absorb anything. So klipa miyabayis, for sure you should still need the klipa. But rather you have to say you're right. Means if it's cold and cold, you just rinse it out. If it's hot on top of cold, you just do the klipa. Tanya Yidach, we learned in another brighter. When you have basar roteach, which is meat, which comes and it falls into chalav roteach, or you have cold which fell into hot, asur, it's going to be asur. But if you have hot into cold and cold into cold, mediach, you're going to rinse it out. So cham letoch tzonen says that it's going to be hot into cold, mediach. Right? Since it's hot, the meikalev shadlo balapurta, so you should still need the klipa. So says the Gemara, the same answer. If it's going to be hot into cold, you do the klipa. Cold into cold, you rinse. So by the way, you should know this is also halakha l'maaseh, which means if you have meat and cheese touching each other, if they're both cold, you just rinse them both off. If one of them is going to be hot, so if the bottom one is hot, right, so that overpowers the top one and it's a problem. But if the top one is hot, you just have to do klipa. And the reason why is because by the time it's going to cool down, it's still going to absorb a little bit. Amar More says, if it's going to be cold into cold, you just rinse it out. Amar Ravuna says, that's only if you didn't salt it. But if you already did milicha, it's going to be asur. Because if you already salt something, salting something makes something hot. It gives heat, right? Because when you salt something, it puts heat, and therefore it's going to be a problem. Kavush, and if you pickle something, so it's like cooking it. Because when you pickle something, it gives a taste. It gets completely absorbed inside of it. Okay? Fine. So what happens is as follows. Amar Rava says, Hadamar Shmuel, that what Shmuel says, Malei acharei ukiroteach. Lo amran ela shelo ne'echal mechama milcho. That's only if you didn't eat it because of the melach. Aval ne'echal mechama milcho. But if you ate it because of the melach, lo. So if you ate it because of the salt, we don't say that. Hahu bar gozala denafa lekada dechimcha. Listen to this case. This is a very famous case. There was a bar gozala, which is like a pigeon, that fell inside of a jug of kimcha. Kimcha is like kutach. It's like a milky type of a thing. Okay. So the halacha says, right? The halacha says that what happened was that there was this pigeon that fell inside this kutach. Kutach is like a milky type of a paste, or nowadays they would say a cream, sour cream, or things like that. So Sharia Rav Chinana bered Rava mipashronia. So what happened was that Rav Chinana, the son of Rava mipashronia, came, right? And what happened is that he said that even though it was maluach, it was going to be salty, he didn't suspect for it. So Amar Rava comes and he says, Man chakim lemishamim takiyaha. Who's the chacham to permit such a thing? Ilav Rav Chanim the Rava mishronia, the Gavar Rava, if it wasn't such a great person, Amar lecha, I would say, Ki amashmul maliach hareu keroteach. I would say that when do we say maliach is roteach if it's so salty that you can't even eat it that way? Then it's considered mamash salty. But here you could eat it the way that it is. One of these words, chai, if it's going to be raw, aval tzli, but if it's going to be roasted, by a klipa, we do need kede klipa. Velo amran, and we didn't say this only if it doesn't have sdakim, different like holes. But if it's got holes, asur is going to be prohibited. If it's also got tavlinim, so then what happens is it makes it like absorb, so then it's also going to be asur even without any holes. Because if it's porous, which means it's got holes, so then it gets absorbed. But here, even without that, it's going to be the same halacha. Amar Rav says, Ayin Vav Amud Bet, yeah, 76b. Yeah, Basar shechuta shamen shetzlao im basar nevela kachush. What happens if you have basar that was done shechita to it, and it's very fatty meat? Now you went and you did the roasting of it with meat, which was basar nevela kachush, which is very, very kachush. Kachush means that it's, how do you call it? Kachush means is that it's like lean, right? It's not fatty. Asur is going to be asur, even though they're not touching each other, right? Why? Because you roasted them together. My tama, what's the reasoning? Because they start coming and they start making each one mitpatem. It makes it like to become fatty, right? So that's what happens. Velevi Amar Ravi says, even if it's basar shechuta kachush, that you roasted it with basar nevela shamen, it's also going to be mutar. My tama, what's the reasoning? Reicha be'almahu, because it's just a reach of the nevela. The reicha leminti, but the smell is nothing. Meaning smell is nothing. It's not the same. There's nothing there. It's just smell. So therefore, it's not something mamashi. So Avi Levi uvda bereshkaluta. So it happened that Levi made an action in the house of the Reshkaluta, big D, the davar acher, to do with a kid, which is right, and davar acher. Davar acher is a pig, obviously, chazir, right? Something else. That's what we call it. And they came in front of Levi, and he permitted they permitted the kid, right? This the son of the goat, for the reason we just mentioned now.
But we're talking about something kosher and not kosher.
Yes, that's what we're talking about. And you're roasting it together.
And regarding the nebula and the meat nebula.
It's the same thing. It's a kosher animal, but it wasn't done shechita, so it's not kosher.
It's not kosher.
It's nevela. Yeah, nevela and shchuta. Shchuta means that it did the shechita to it. Okay? So, Meitvei, we're going to ask the following question. We're not supposed to roast two psachim like one because of the ta'arovet. My love ta'arovet te'amim, and we're not talking about the ta'arovet because of the te'amim, right? Because of the tam, the kasha levi, and that's a question of levi. So answers the Gemara, lo mipnei ta'arovet hagufin, because of the ta'arovet of gufin. What does it mean the gufin? Because maybe the two are going to get mixed up together. The achinami mistabra, that's also logical to say the same thing. Midiktani, because we learned seifa in the seifa, afilu gedi v'taleh, even if it's going to happen with the gedi and the taleh. The gedi is the kid, right? The taleh is the sheep. So he says over here, right, as follows. It says over here, right? If you're going to tell me gufin because of the two different animals, so then I understand what we're talking about, even if it's a gedi and a taleh. Why? Because they're two different species. One is a gedi and one is a taleh. But if you're going to tell me, because one's basically the son of a goat, one's the son of a sheep. So he says, if you're going to tell me though, it's because of the ta'arovet, the te'amim, because of the taste, mali gdi v'tleh, mali gdi gdi. What's the difference between the gdi and the tleh and gdi gdi? At the end of the day, What's the difference? It's the taste is going to become mixed up. So obviously the only reason why it's asur is because maybe they're going to get mixed up. But if it's going to be the taste, it's going to be permitted. So this is a tiyufta against Rav, because Rav just told you that what. So he's saying over here, this is a tiyufta against Rav, that he's saying recha miltahi. Here you're saying that it's not true, right? Because here we're not talking about the recha is nothing really be'emet in essence. Okay, fine. So Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah comes and he says, Hacha ma'eskina, what are we dealing with? You came and you roasted it in two different pots. So therefore, since you roasted it in two different pots, there's no tarovet of ta'amim, of tastes. Because if it's two different pots, each one has their own taste. They're not mixing up of the taste. It's not like you're roasting two different things, right? And therefore, when you roast two different things together, it has the same taste. Here, each one, it's in a pot. You know what pot roast is? What's pot roast? Huh? The taste, one is kosher, one is not kosher. So you're going to give a non-kosher taste.
I miss about the taste. I miss 5 lines in the taste.
Of the tarovet ta'amim. Tarovet ta'amim means that if you're going to mix up the taste, that's what makes it non-kosher. Because if you had a non-kosher taste,
What is the connection between tzonen and tzonen that we spoke until now?
that was afterwards.
No, tzonen זה היה בדף הראשון.
Yeah, we finished that already.
You're right. So what is the connection to that? Ta'amim to tzonen.
So says the Gemara, again, we're talking about pot roast. What does pot roast mean? Remember, the pot roast means that if you're going to cook inside an oven, but in a pot, that's called pot roast. Because you're not cooking like on top of a fire and you have liquid. You're cooking with the liquid of the food in itself, which is basically called pot roast. Here we're talking about, it doesn't say the words tzli kedar, but we're talking about that you're actually cooking, you're roasting it in two different pots. So therefore, when you're roasting it in two different pots, right? So therefore, that's what he's coming in and saying, Kegon shetzlau b'shtei kederot. So therefore, since it's going to be shtei kederot, there's no tarovet of ta'amin. There's no mixture of different tastes which are going from one another. So therefore, obviously, we're talking about two different animals. We're not talking about different tastes, but different animals. Because remember, before we were talking about a gedi and a tle, which the gedi is the son of a goat and a tle is the son of a sheep. Okay, and that's what we said. We were talking about the tarovet of gufin and not the tarovet of te'amim. Te'amim is tastes, not of the bodies of the different animals, but rather different tastes. So says the Gemara, you're not allowed to come and you're not allowed to roast anything. The Korban Pesach cannot be in a pot. Korban Pesach needs to be roasted. It's not in a pot. What does that mean? But rather you have to say you're right. It's like a pot. Really, there's no pot here, right? Because it cannot be a pot. But rather what happened was that there was a hefsek between the two different shipudim, right, of there was a hefsek between them, and therefore there's no tarovet of different tastes. Right? Many times you see that you could put in the oven two different utensils, two different foods, and the taste will transfer one to another. Obviously, if they're not covered, right? That's exactly what we're talking about here. The haki kamer. So this is what it means to say. And solin, right? And solin.
The barbecue אבל זה לא בדרך כלל קורה, במיוחד שלא צולים את זה כמו שאנחנו אמרנו שצולים. I'm sorry, barbecue usually doesn't happen, usually, unless you're, and especially when we learn that we do it vertical like that, right?
Right, but you have to remember that the ovens in the olden days is not an open barbecue like we have nowadays. No, that's the way how they used to do it, but it was in a closed oven. It wasn't like nowadays. It wasn't an open barbecue like nowadays. Yeah, they used to have the ovens were like this. They were closed ovens. Yeah. It wasn't an oven like a flat barbecue.
No, flat. Like that.
No, that was just, think about it. Right now, if you have that skewer like that, even nowadays, how do you do shawarma? Shawarma like that, but what? They have to have an oven, because if you have only on the bottom, you could put it straight up, nothing's gonna happen. So they used to have a closed type of, nowadays, the way that they make the shawarma machine is this, like this, and then it's going around. So it was the same concept, but it was completely closed. It was completely closed. Okay, completely closed. Okay, that's why obviously it would give the taste, meaning mixture of tastes would still happen inside, because it's inside, it's everything inside. But here we just said there's a pasek. Yeah, babahaki, pasek. Yeah, once there's a pasek.
Why would they never spoken in the Gemara about balua?
That's what we're talking about here. No, because
but 2 days ago did not.
You're right. This is the first time. Is here we're talking about the tarovet of different tastes. Before we were talking about tarovet of whether it's going to be hot and cold and cold and cold and so on and so on. Now we're talking about the actual concept of when we're doing tzli of the roasting. Yeah. So now we're talking about now tzli. So it says over here, yeah, it says as follows. En solin shne pesachim ke'echad mipnei tarovet. My tarovet tamim. Says the Gemara, you're not even allowed to roast 2 pesachim in the same oven. Why? In one shot. Why? Because the tarovet. What tarovet? Tarovet what? Mixture of what? So he says it's taste. Va'afilu ken shte kederot teleka tarovet tamim. So if you're going to do it like 2 kederot, which there's no tarovet tamim, it's still going to be a sur. Mishum tarovet gufin. Va'afilu gdivet len. Even if it's going to be a gdivet le, which means that here the Gemara is actually answering to you again one more time. Shte kederot cannot be a kedera because you're not allowed to put the korban pesach in a kedera. It's like shte kederot. And what we're talking about that you're going to put it in 2 different things. So says the Gemara, basically what's happening now is that we're going to have a case of tarovet te'amim, right? So again, you have that's why you're not allowed to put the 2 different korban pesachs together because of the mixture of tastes. So Amar Mari says, Ketanai, it's a machloket tanaim. Harodeh pat chama untana al pi chavit yain shel truma. Imagine right now you've got hot bread and you put it on top of a barrel of wine of truma. The Bemin says it's going to be osed, it's going to be asur for strangers, which means again it's wine of truma. So therefore, it's going to be a sur of strangers. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's going to be mutar. Rabbi Yosef matir bechitin ve'oser be'seorim. Rabbi Yosef says it's going to be permitted in wheat, but prohibited of barley. Because the seorim, the barley, takes the smell of the wine. So my love tanai is it's not a machloket tanaim. Temor savar reicha lav minta, yumor savar reicha minta. Did we hold that it's reicha as minta lav minta? So says the Gemara levi vadai tanaihi. But according to Rav, maybe it's also a tanai. So Rav is going to tell you the chuli alma reicha minte. According to everybody, reicha is mintai. Didn't we say that? If you're talking about a hot bread and an open barrel, according to everybody, it's going to be a sur. According to everybody, it's going to be mutar. When it's a machloke, bepat chama v'chavit chatuma or pat sonen v'chavit ptucha. V'anami so to here kepat chama v'chavit ptucha damya. We're talking about that it's hot bread and an open barrel. So again, by the way, you should know, just to bring this down to halakha l'maaseh, just to understand what we're talking about, reicha mintahi is halakha l'maaseh even today. Why? Because reicha mintahi is, for example, can I cook meat and let's say fish in the same oven? Or even meat and cheese. So obviously meat and cheese, everyone's going to tell me, for sure no. Right? But even meat and fish. Why? Reicha mintahi. Reicha mintahi means the reach, which is coming out, if it mixes, it becomes a big problem. Right? Now, there's 2 different things that we have to actually know. There's something which is called reicha and something which is called zea. Reicha, right, is the actual just in the same time. Zea is that it comes up, it gets absorbed into the walls, and then it will come back down, right? Which is much worse. So zea is much worse, right? Yeah. Zea is much worse because reicha is only a din lechatechila. But the avad, it's going to be okay in certain scenarios. Zea is much more problematic. So, for example, the entire halachot nowadays of cooking, right, and all these different things, right, it all depends, what the scenarios are. But again, this is all to do with reicha and zea. So, Tani Rav Kahana bered Rav Chinana Saba taught Rav Kahana, the son of Rav Chinana Saba, Pacha fain tzli batanur. Imagine you have bread, and you cooked it with meat, right, in a tanur. So, asur lo achla bekutach. You're not allowed to eat this meat with the bread, with kutach. So imagine, I've got meat in the oven, and I made my bread. So my wife was making chalot. She comes, she puts it in the oven, and I have the meat and bread. What does halacha say? The halacha states that what? It's meaty bread. I'm not allowed to eat it with fish, with milk. Okay? So
even if it's reicha,
yeah, that's what we're talking about. No, you did it together at the same time. At the same time, you have the reicha and the zeh. No, one second. This is talking about that you did it at the same time.
Okay.
Did it at the same time, that's it. It becomes meaty bread. Okay? So now it says the Gemara, yeah. Right? There was once a fish that they roasted it with meat. So they actually prohibited to come and to eat it with kutach. 1 second. So the Gemara says that there was a fish that they went and they roasted it together with the meat. So the same thing, they prohibited to eat it together with kutach. Okay, so more Ravashi says, he says, even to eat this fish, right, with melach is going to be asur. Forget about with cheese, right? Why? He says, because it's kasher l'reicha, it's kasher to tzarat. When you have meat and fish is kasher to tzarat. So it's very, very problematic. Okay, fine. So it says now we're on the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah on the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Aleph. Chamisha dvarim ba'in betuma ve'ena nechalim betuma. Ayin Vav Amud Bet, sorry. So there's 5 things, 5 korbanot that they're going to be brought betum'ah, but they cannot be eaten betum'ah. Korbana Omer. Remember on the 16th of Nisan, you bring the Korbana Omer. The Omer is like Sefirat Omer, that we call the Omer. That's where it starts, Sefirat Omer. That's why we always start on the 2nd day of Pesach, right? So this is on Korbana Omer. Shtei Alechem, right, is going to be the Korban on Shavuot. It's called Shtei Alechem. You bring 2 loaves of bread. Remember, usually the majority of Korbanot were all matzah. The only ones which were chametz is only going to be chametz. The only things which is going to be chametz is what? Is the 10 loaves of the Todah.
Amen.
Remember that all the korbanot that were brought in the Bet HaMikdash, all the korbanot were usually matzah, except for the Shtei Alechem, which is on Shavuot, and the 10 lachmei Todah. The Korban Todah had 40 loaves of different types of bread, and 10 of those loaves were chametz. Other than that, everything else was matzah. Lechem apanim, zivchei shel metzibur, right? The zivchei shel metzibur, sirei Roshei Chodashim, Pesach sheba betumah, also the Pesach which came in tumah, right? Ne'echal betumah shelo ba mitchilato ela lachila. So basically like this, it comes out 5 different sacrifices. The Korban HaOmer, Shtei Alechem, Lechem apanim with the 12 breads that were always there, zivchei shel metzibur, right? The zivchei shel metzibur, sirei Roshei Chodashim. Now says the Gemara, the Pesach is ba betumah and also ne'echal betumah. Okay, so that means all the other 5 that we mentioned, you bring it betumah, but you're not allowed to eat it. So you brought it, you're allowed to bring it, even though you're tmeim and everything, everyone's tameh, but they're not allowed to eat it. The Korban Pesach, sheba betumah, ne'echal betumata, shelo ba mitchilato ela lachila, because the entire purpose of the Korban Pesach was to eat it. Meaning the Korban HaOmer and all the other ones, even though you're right, usually you also eat it, but that's not the main concept of the Korban, right? The main concept is to bring the Korban, and then part of the Korban, you also eat it. But here, the main concept of the Korban Pesach is to eat it, so therefore you're allowed to eat it.
And so why do we have Pesach Sheni?
Pesach Sheni is only for individuals. Remember, an individual that's tameh on Pesach Rishon, he brings it on Pesach Sheni. But if the majority of tzibur are tmeim, they bring the Korban Pesach betumah and they eat it betumah.
Okay.
Okay, very good. So says the Gemara, Chamisha lemiyut temah. Why do I have to say the number 5? Right? What? Yes. Of what? Of the lechem apanim? The lechem apanim הוא 12 חלות, right? Okay.
זה לא מצות. כאילו, סליחה, זו שאלה, האם זה חלות או מצות? זה מיטב לזיכרוני, מחילה.
I would have to check that. I would have to check, but I think it's also a type of a matzah. I don't think it's a challah. So it says the Gemara, Chamisha lemiyut temah. What is the 5 coming to exclude? Lemiyut chagigat 15. This comes to exclude the chagigat 15. Remember, there was chagigat 14 and then chagigat 15. The Korban Chagiga was brought on the 15th, just like it was brought on the Shalosh Regalim. And then you have the chagigat 14, which was brought on the 14th in certain circumstances in order to make sure that you're going to eat it on a full stomach. I would have thought to say Korban Tziburu, that it's considered Korban Tziburu Klele Meod Mued, and it has a fixed time. So Tidche Tumah, it's going to push off the Tumah. Kamash Malan comes to teach you. Given the Letashlumin, since you have Tashlumin, Kol Shiva, all the 7 days, Ludach Shabbat, it's not going to push off Shabbat. And since it doesn't push off Shabbat, it doesn't push off the Tumah, which means like this. Remember, every Shalosh Regalim, you bring a Korban Chagiga. This Korban Chagiga, you eat it. Now, if you didn't bring it on the first day, you could bring it on the second. Then bring it on the second, third, fourth, till 7. Okay, you have the 7 days of Tashlumin. And that's the reason why also after Shavuot, you have the 7 days of Tashlumin, that we have 7 days that you do not bring, you do not say Tachronim and so on and so on because of the 7 days. So says the Gemara, the fact that you have Tashlumin, you do not bring it on the first day, you have to bring it later on. So even if a person was Tameh, right, it doesn't push off Tumah. Because since it doesn't push off Shabbat because there's Tashlumin, it doesn't push off Tumah because also there's Tashlumin. So says the Gemara, V'nitrenami sirei regalim. What about the sirei regalim? Which means the musaf of the shalosh regalim, you bring sirei chatat, you bring sirim onto the mizbeach. So why don't you bring that? So says the Gemara, zivchei shel metzibur includes the sirei regalim of the korban musaf as well. So says the Gemara, what about then sirei Roshei Chodashim? Nami lo nitne. Tatan zivchei shel metzibur. So why do we bring down sirei Roshei Chodashim? So answers the Gemara, which is the same thing. If you're going to tell me zivchei shel metzibur, any zivachim of the tzibur, so why did you didn't bring down sirei regalim, but you did bring down sirei Roshei Chodashim? So says the Gemara, Amri sirei Roshei Chodashim, in Zayin Amud Aleph, sirei Roshei Chodashim itzrichale, you didn't need it. Why? Salka, then I would have thought to say haloktiv behu, it's not written mued. right? That means by the Sidera Shech Chodashim, it's not written Moed. So Kamash Malan comes to teach you the Rosh Chodesh Yikum Moed. Rosh Chodesh is called a Moed. Rosh Chodesh is called a Moed. Kid Abaye, just like Abaye says, that Abaye Tammuz, the Aishata Tammuz of this year, Maluye Malyuha, is going to be full of 30 days, right? Dichtib is usually Tammuz is 29 days, right? Av is 30 days. Remember, Sivan, Tammuz, Av. Sivan, Maleh. Tammuz, Chaser. Av, Maleh. So Sivan, which has Shavuot, is 30 days. Tammuz is 29 days. Av is 30 days. He said this year Tammuz is a full month of 30 days. Tichtiv kara alai mo'el lishbor bachurai, which means that Kodesh Baruch Hu was misovev, that they added an extra day to Chodesh of Tammuz to make it Rosh Chodesh, and he called the kara alai mo'ed. So therefore he comes and he says, so it comes out that the Meraglim, they came back on the 8th of Av, and the night of Tisha B'Av they were crying, and then they had this day of a mo'ed, right, lishbor bachurai. This was during the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, second Beit HaMikdash. So according to Abaye, it comes out that the Rosh Chodesh is called Moed, which means because basically there we're trying to make a calculation that when they came back, the spies, they started crying on the night of Tisha B'Av. And because they cried in vain on the night of Tisha B'Av, that caused the Tisha B'Av of the next year not next year, meaning that's caused the Tisha B'Av cycle of the history. So the question is, if you do 40 days that they were spying out the land, how does it come out to Tisha B'Av? It should be one day before. So the Gemara answers, it should be one day before. Because basically the way of the count when they sent out the spies, right? When they sent out the spies, 40 days, it would have come out that when they were going to come back, they would have come back on the 8th of the 7th of Av.
We know exactly when they left.
Yes, it's brought that Rashi brings it down over there. So what happens was though, is that there, Abaye comes and he says in the Gemara over there, what happened was, Tammuz was 30 days instead of 29. By Tammuz being 30 instead of 29, that's why it came out that it was the one day earlier, and therefore it was the night of Tisha B'Av. Okay, but basically, again, it's a whole calculation. But there it says, Karalai Moed, it was called a Moed. So from here, the Chidush is, Rosh Chodesh is called Moed. But since it's not written Mefurash Moed, I would have thought that maybe Sidera Rosh Chodeshim are not going to be brought Betuma. So Kamash Malan, they are brought Betuma, but it's called a Moed.
So these also reflect on Birkat HaMazal of Rosh Chodesh. Magdil Migdol.
Because it's a Moed. Yes, 100%. Okay?
Yes,
Yes, because it's a Moed. Okay, very good. So